Hello, this is Destry, and this is my presentation on Confucius and his style of leadership. So, Confucius was born around 551 BCE, so this predates Socrates. He was born in eastern China during the Warring States period. Now, this was a time when people were feeling as if there was more and more tension between the different states. Rulers were being assassinated, sometimes even by family members. It was very violent. People began to lose their confidence in the central government. And so, this is the period that Confucius was born into. His father died when he was very young, so despite his father being of higher status and of nobility, Confucius grew up in poverty. However, this fostered a deep empathy for the well being of the common people and very much influenced his philosophical ideas and his teachings. Confucius says that he didn't come up with really anything new, basically, that he just rejuvenated these old traditions of the past. But most historians agree that he does deserve a little bit more credit where it's due for some of the new transformations to these ideas that he had and the contributions that he did make. However influential he was not really recognized nor appreciated in his time. So at around 56, he realized that his teachings weren't going to be implemented in his state, so he then spent the next 13 years traveling from state to state, trying to advocate these humanistic philosophies to the different rulers. However, rulers were really only interested in expanding their own power and not really with getting with his ideas. So at the end of that 13 years, he came back to his home and devoted the rest of his life to teaching these ideas and to compiling his writings so that they could be preserved. One of the key things that Confucius taught about was education and its role in establishing morality. So he emphasizes developing one's skills and the inner character of a person through education. And the five virtues that he emphasized were human benevolence, righteousness, proper right, wisdom, and trustworthiness. He believed that society should be ruled and maintained by meritocracy based on morals that are actively being demonstrated not only by the people but by the ruler as well. And he really promoted this adherence to rituals in order to maintain these moral standards. And so having education and morality and this idea of self-transcendence, in theory, is supposed to produce these ideal leaders, right? That would establish and foster a harmonious society and state, giving people traditions to adhere to and kind of this moral exemplar that would help them have a more established society that adhered a little bit better. And another thing that he really emphasized was this virtuous leadership, right? That through education, leaders are able to have things like kindness and justice, and that those two traits produce a good, humane, and fair minded leader. He really also emphasized this idea that a punitive justice system isn't necessarily the best one, right? And that a righteous government should favor reliance on things like moral virtue and social status over punitive laws to maintain their order and stability in society. And that's because moral virtues are able to produce trust and faith in people, right? Whereas punitive measures might stop somebody from doing something, but only really for a moment. It's only going to instill this sense of deceit into a person. And Confucius said, guide the people with government orders, regulate them with penalties, and the people will seek to evade the law and be without shame. Guide them with virtue, regulate them with ritual, and they will have a sense of shame and become upright. And so this kind of translates into these five cardinal role relations that Confucius really emphasized. And these five roles are between the emperor and the subject, the father and the son, the husband and the wife, the elder brother and the younger brother, and then from friend to friend. Now, of course, Confucius lived about 3,000 years ago, so of course these are pretty gendered and pretty specific, but I think that they can still translate to the more broader sense of, parent to child, spouse to spouse, etc. And these roles are in place to provide the sense of social principle, right? that defines what a proper behavior for a certain individual is in this social hierarchy. And so Confucianism really emphasizes that a person should conform to their proper role, and that this inadequacy between members and this basis of power distance in these Asian cultures is actually that of a positive one, right? Because it's supposed to emphasize the human emotional bonds that we have, this group orientation, and this harmonious relationship that we have with other people. And he emphasizes that the self is the center of all relationships, and it evolves to a larger network of human relationships, such as one's family, one's friends, and ultimately the state. And so, by having this reciprocal relationship, leaders and followers are able to carry out their obligations and maintain these relationships in a way that's complementary. Even though it is a bit asymmetrical, there is this obligation to reciprocate. And that again plays into the role of the leader, right, which is supposed to be effective through education, discipline development, and the overall improvement of the well-being of their subordinates. So while individuals are required to show mutual and complementary obligations, such as like the junior respecting and being obedient to the senior, that's not a one-sided relationship, right? The senior is supposed to take care of and protect the junior. And so it can be easy to see how the balance of power can get skewed in a traditional sense, but I think that Confucius really is trying to emphasize this idea of like behaving like a benevolent and authoritarian father, treating your subordinate with the care and compassion that you would from like a paternal perspective. And then he also emphasizes treating your subordinates according to their individual characteristics. So it's not to say that every single subordinate needs to act like the same kind of person and fit into a mold. Confucius was actually considered to be the first real like teacher in China, and he was kind of famous for catering his individualistic teaching styles to the specific person, and that reciprocal relationship is supposed to extend to catering that wisdom and that knowledge that you pass on and depart to others in a way that's conducive for them. And then the other big role of leaders to, be a role model, to demonstrate the values of seeking self-perfection through learning, through meditating, through self-reflection, so that power doesn't become imbalanced in a way that's negative towards that subordinate, right? So that self-reflection on part of the leaders is meant to serve as kind of a safeguard against exploitation. Because ultimately, the legacy of Confucianism is that it's meant to produce leadership that invokes the quality of character that makes other people want to follow them. That being a leader isn't necessarily that you have more power than other people. It's not inherent, but rather something that's cultivated. He really wanted to educate the nobility class as well as the working class so that everybody had this sense of morals and sense of structure within their society. I mean, especially considering he did come from such a tumultuous time in history. And so overall, I'd say that since his teachings really foster this idea of kindness and justice as the traits that produce, a good, humane, and fair-minded leader, that makes his leadership style worthy of emulating and worthy of looking into, especially considering that this is kind of different than some of the leaders that we've learned about, right? It's offering an alternative way to approach leadership and these relations that we have to subordinates, because it is a high power distance culture, and the hierarchical inequalities that they have is considered the basis of their societal order. So even though it may not be as conducive for, say, an Anglo country like ourselves that has very high individualism, and really values the subordinate being there, that step-by-step process with the leader making a decision, right? But other countries, ones that are steeped in Confucianism, they don't really have that same viewpoint. So I think it's very valuable to look at this style of leadership, especially considering that Confucianism is very heavily ingrained in a lot of these East Asian cultures and is considered to be what brought forth the success of East Asian economies. And so overall, yeah, I'd say that his style of leadership, while it's not necessarily something that we see a lot of in the general context, or in, I guess, in the original context of this style of leadership, that it is still something valuable to learn about and read about a little bit. And here are my references. Thank you.